Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this is episode 31. So, this week I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of my experiences as a paranormal investigator. Last month, I was on a show, the podcast, What If They're Wrong, hosted by Jeremiah, who's an awesome guy, great interviewer, cool show. So, go check him out. I'm going to put links to his show in the description below. So, please go give him some listens and some likes and some reviews. He's really awesome. We had a great chat and we were talking about some of my experiences as a paranormal investigator. And most of the stories I've talked about on this show so far have been personal experiences, just things I've dealt with in everyday life, living at home, and not really things that I've experienced as an investigator. And truth be told, we don't have many experiences as investigators. We've done a lot of paranormal investigating, and the vast majority of those investigations yielded nothing. Sometimes you get a little sound here or there, but nothing impressive, nothing to write home about. And people always ask me what was my most favorite moment from being a paranormal investigator. And there are so many, and most of them have nothing to do with ghosts. It's just about hanging out with friends and having a good time and the bonding that we've done. And, that stuff has always been great. But there was one experience that we couldn't really explain that we actually captured on video and more audio, but it's a video clip. We've had lots of experiences that we couldn't explain, and they were more just gut feelings or things that we saw out of the corner of our eye or things that we heard when the cameras were off or the recorders were off. And there's lots of little things like that that you can chalk up to being tired because it's the end of the night or whatever. Very few things were actually captured while we were filming, while we were recording, as is often the case. So this clip that I'm going to talk about, and I'll get to it in a little bit, I just wanted to go through a little bit of history first. We were based on Staten Island, New York, and it's part of New York City, and it's the borough of Parks. So there's a lot more ruralness out here than there is in, say, Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx. And there's a place, I'm going to just do a little share screen here. There's a place on Staten Island called Sailor's Snug Harbor. And I'm pulling this up now. And it's located on Staten Island, and it was founded in the early 1800s. It was created from the funds from a will from Robert Richard Randall, who was the heir to a shipping fortune. He died in 1801. And in his will, he stated that he wanted his fortune and estate to be used to build and operate a haven for aged, decrepit, and worn-out sailors. And I'm quoting here from the Snug Harbor website. So the decrepit and worn-out parts are not very nice terms, but that's what we're looking at. It was the day and the age. But this was essentially a retirement home for sailors. These were guys who worked out on the open seas, merchant marines, and other sailors and shipping lanes and things like that. And when they were old and retired, a lot of these guys didn't have families or immediate families. They'd have extended families. And when they got back to the mainland and they were too old to work on the boats, they really couldn't get jobs on the mainland. They just didn't have the experience, or they were just too old. And so Robert Randall created Sailor Snug Harbor, and it was essentially this retirement home. A little town. Honestly, it had a community with farms, bakeries, workshops, a chapel, hospital, dormitories, rec areas, gardens. It was just a nice place for these guys to retire to. And it ran for many years. In the mid-20th century, of course, we had things like Social Security, other welfare programs, Medicaid, things to help retirees. So the necessity for a place like this sort of dwindled, and it attained landmark status. And today there are some museums there. There's a music hall, performing arts galleries, art galleries, gardens. They do some agriculture there. They grow things. They do composting. They have events there. They have weddings there. My first marriage happened at Snug Harbor. So they have reception halls. They still have the chapel there. So it's a great place. I still take my son there sometimes. There's a lot of the old original buildings that are still standing. It's just a great place to walk around, be outdoors, and see some history. It's also allegedly quite haunted. And we had learned about this. And we, with our friends, I'm going to switch screens now. We did a documentary years ago called Haunted Snug Harbor, where we worked on this documentary detailing the history of Snug Harbor, but also some of the haunted stories. And this documentary was put together by our friends, Brian J. Cano and Chris Mancuso, and they did an awesome job on this documentary. And Brian J. Cano, if that name sounds familiar to you, he was on Haunted Collector with John Zaffis, and he's currently on Paranormal Caught on Camera. And he's a friend. We go way back. I hope to have him on the show at some point. I still need to reach out to him, but he's a busy dude. He's touring the country with Dustin Parry and doing his own show at conventions and investigations, and good guy. We go back way back, and this had all started because we were doing many haunted tours of Snug Harbor, usually around the Halloween time, and we would take people around and teach them a little bit about the history, and we would bring EMF detectors, and it was great. We'd teach people about the grounds, we teach people about the haunted history. This documentary, by the way, is on YouTube. So the full thing is on there, and you'll see me in there. So, as well as some other members of my team, which I don't have queued up at the moment, but they're in there. So give it a watch. It's a really good documentary on not only the history of Snug Harbor, but the haunted history of Snug Harbor, because lots of things are alleged to have happened there. So I'll stop sharing this screen now and go back. So we'd investigated a bunch of times privately. Again, the events, there was always a lot of people. It was, 20, 30 people in a group, and we're taking them from building to building. And each group would take different groups of people, each paranormal group, I mean. So Chris and Brian were in a group called Scared on Staten Island. They had a local TV show, but they branched out into doing paranormal investigating. And it was Brian and Chris and Carrie Ann and Brooke and Greg, I'm sorry. And there was another team called SIPS, Staten Island Paranormal Society, our friends Amy and Christy and Lisa. And then there was my team, the New York Paranormal Society, and that was myself and Laura and Jimmy and Colette and Stacy and Michelle. And miss you guys. We haven't really been able to do much investigating the past couple of years for various and sundry reasons. I hope to have some of them on the show in the future because we got some cool stories to tell, and it'll be good just to reconnect with them. But anyway, we had known about the history of Snug Harbor for a while, and that it was haunted. And one building that kept coming up was the Matron's house. It was a building called the Matron's house. And there's lots of buildings on the property. There's the governor's house. There's the Matron's house. There's the cottages. The music hall. The music hall is apparently haunted. The chapel is apparently haunted. So a lot of different stories. And the stories that we kept hearing more and more and over again from people we interviewed who worked there, including security guards and groundskeepers and people like that, was the Matron's house. And that had a lot of stories about furniture moving, doors being unlocked. And again, what we'd hear over and over again was maintenance people and security guards saying they would go in, check the house would be great, all the furniture is where it's supposed to be, they would lock up for the night, and they'd come back the next morning and all the doors would be open and the furniture would be strewn about, windows would be open that they knew they closed. And it was just this recurring theme, and everyone we asked said, yeah, a lot of buildings here are haunted, but the Matron's house is the most haunted. So my team and I reached out to Snug Harbor. We set up an investigation. And at the time, a clerical error was made. And we're not sure by who. It may have been someone else in our group who was in the group at the time. But we booked the governor's house, which is named after the governor of Snug Harbor, who kind of ran Snug Harbor. And it actually wasn't his house. That house got demolished, and this was, I guess, his accountant's house. But they call it the governor's house. The governor of Snug Harbor at the time was Thomas Melville, who is the brother of Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick. So a lot of history there. Anyway, we did an investigation of the governor's house, and it was probably one of the spookiest investigations we'd ever done. We didn't catch a lot of evidence, but there was a lot of things being seen by us and heard by us and experienced by us. It was more of a personal sort of experience than something that we could catch on film or on audio. And that's fine. We are pretty skeptical, but that was, I would say, one of the few places where all of us had experiences we were not expecting to. We were like, we wanted the matron's house. We got the governor's house. Like, we're not going to catch anything. And we really went in with low expectations and just came out of it feeling really disturbed. It just had an odd aura to the place. And a lot of us saw things or felt things, or, Laura had something touch her lips, like almost to shut her up when she was talking, and people were being tapped on the shoulder, and I saw some shadowy figures that shouldn't have been there. So it was a really cool experience, but nothing to really show for it except our personal stories, which this show is about, and I will talk about those another time. But today I did want to talk about the matron's house because I do have a video clip of a time that we were investigating and we actually heard something. So I'm going to set this clip up and just give a little bit of a backstory, and I'll give a little bit of history of the matron's house too. And this history is a little sketchy. We don't know if any of this really happened, but the story goes that because this was all sailors, it was all men living there like in a retirement facility. And there were women working there to do laundry, to do cooking, again, 1800s. But the women were there to basically take care of the men. So they ran the hospital, they ran the bakery, they prepared the food, they did the laundry. And there was a house on the property where the women lived and resided, and that was called the matron's house. And their boss was the matron. She was the head woman who sort of delegated all the responsibilities to the women who helped the sailors. Now, the story gets a little convoluted, and there's no evidence of this ever happening. And there could be a couple of reasons for that. But I'll tell the story, and then I'll go into why we have our doubts. So the story goes that the matron, the most popular story, I think there are some variations, but the most popular story is that the matron became impregnated by a sailor on the grounds. And that was verboten. That's not something that should have happened. It was frowned upon. So allegedly, she gave birth to this child, and the child never saw light of day. Allegedly, she chained the child up in the basement. Varying stories say two different things, two pipes, to a radiator. But the child was chained up. The child was fed. Very few people knew about her illegitimate child, but the child was kept in the basement until about the age of 13 or 14. Allegedly, then the child somehow escaped. We don't know how, but the child escaped and took a big pair of like garden shears, so big, sharp scissors, essentially, and viciously attacked the matron, killing her. Word got out in the community, because again, this was almost like its own little self-contained town, like a gated community, but without gates, I guess. And the sailors and the workers found the child and allegedly hung him from a tree that was right behind the matron's house, which was supposedly there. We'd seen the tree. It's not there anymore. So if you go to Snug Harbor, there's no more tree there. There's kind of a lump in the ground where the stump was when, where the tree was there, and it is gone. I don't know why. I heard, again, varying different things. It got hit by lightning, or it was just a dead tree and they had to take it down. So we, again, as skeptics, as people in our team, are very good researchers. Laura is a historian. Jimmy is a great historian with many resources at our fingertips that most people don't have. And we did a lot of digging, and we found no evidence of this ever happening. This is kind of like an urban legend that Snug Harbor tells, and we don't know where it came from. It might be true. Just because there's no evidence in the newspapers about it doesn't mean it wasn't true back then. Not everything made the local papers. And again, if this was its own self-contained community, it's very possible that they kept it secret and it never got out. So take that as you will. It's an interesting story. It sounds like it could be true, but we've found no evidence. So we wanted to investigate the matron's house basically because of these stories from the groundskeepers, from the maintenance crew, from the security guards. And at the time, we were very friendly with one of the security guards who worked there. He no longer works there, but we knew him and we had permission to be there, but he kind of oversaw our investigation. So we were working at the time with an author named Matt Haas and his assistant. And on this investigation, it was just myself, Laura, and Jimmy. And we took Matt and his assistant uh, to the matron's house because he was writing a book and he wanted to kind of experience some real New York City haunted locations. And a lot of the stuff in the city has just been done to death. And Staten Island is known as the Forgotten Borough. So a lot of people don't realize a lot of the history that we do have out here between Snug Harbor and the Conference House and the Lighthouse Museum and just so many other things that are really fascinating, but nobody really wants to come to Staten Island, especially if they're coming from out of state. They want to come see the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, and they don't really make it to Staten Island, even though there's a lot of historical stuff here to do and see. So we had permission to do the matron's house. I think we wanted to do the governor's house, but it was off limits at that point. They were doing some renovations or some fixing up of the inside, and we weren't able to get into the governor's house. We said, we'll do the matron's house. I mean, that's supposed to have a lot of activity. And we hadn't really investigated that part yet. We had done the governor's house a few times, like I said, mistakenly, and then we went back because of our experiences, but we hadn't done the matron's house. We said, oh, let's do the matron's house. So we did the matron's house, and our security guard basically locked us in. He said, there's an event going on down the street at one of the reception halls. It's a Suite 16. We don't want any of the kids coming out and bumbling into the house without permission. So he says, I'm going to lock you guys in. You can get out, obviously, but nobody else can come in. And it's an old building. Again, it's probably from the 1800s. And entering the building is a noisy affair. It's a big, heavy door, and it creaks, and the whole house kind of shudders and squeaks if you come in and close the door. It kind of slams, and again, the whole house vibrates. It's all old wood and original glass, so very old house. So the five of us, again, myself, Laura, Jimmy, Matt, and his assistant, were up in the second floor hallway, and it's almost like a landing because there's stairs that go up to the second floor. Then there's another set of stairs that go up to the third floor. And we had been there for a couple of hours, and we were doing an EVP session, and we had our meters out, and we're asking questions, and we're hoping that something happens just so Matt had something for his book. And for the longest time, nothing was happening. And shortly before midnight, you'll hear this in the clip, and I try to be, full disclosure here. The kids got out of the Suite 16 and they're going home. And so you can kind of hear them in the distance screaming and yelling, and, they were partying. So they're going back to the parking lot, and you hear us address that in the video. And we're kind of teasing the spirits and saying, okay, it's coming up on midnight. We've been here a while. Nothing's happening. I guess we're going to go home soon, And just as we say that, we hear footsteps on the stairs. And this is, again, an old wooden house, and it's very clearly footsteps, boom, 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 coming up the stairs. And we all acknowledge it. We all hear it at the time. And then I call out, hello, just to see if someone did come in, which was unlikely because, again, anybody coming in, you'd hear the keys, you'd hear the lock turning, you'd hear, again, this is an old wooden house with heavy doors, and it creaked. But these were definite footfalls. This was not the house settling. It wasn't the house creaking. So I call out, hello. And then again, you still hear more footsteps. And everyone sitting there, we all agreed that it was footsteps. And there was no dissension in the ranks of, is that a voice? Is that footsteps? Is that someone knocking on the door? It was just clearly footsteps. And afterwards, we got up and we ran through the house just to make sure that the doors were all still locked and that nobody was in the house. We went from the attic to the basement. It had only been the five of us. Again, the security guard locked us in and told us, text him when we're done, and he'd come and let us out. Again, we could get out, but he wanted to lock up after we were done. But there was nobody else in the house. We did top to bottom. We checked the house. Nobody could have gotten out of the house without making noise. Again, it's a noisy house, and we were all just sitting there very quiet so as not to make the house squeak, but footsteps, and then they stopped, and then I say hello, and then more footsteps follow. So what I'm going to show you here is the initial clip. It's unedited. It's just the full clip of us talking during our EVP session. You hear the footsteps. You hear me say hello. You hear the footsteps again. And then there's a little clip of us just going through the house. I think we're in the basement at this point and just checking to see if anyone's there. We had gone from the top to the bottom just to make sure nobody could get out. After that clip, I'm going to show a modified clip where I try to boost the volume of the footsteps. And again, in both of these instances, I'm going to recommend that you listen with headphones, because without the headphones, you can kind of hear it, but the headphones really make it clear that these sound like footsteps. And it's not kids outside down the road coming out of the Sweet 16. It's clearly in the house. It's clearly footsteps on wood, like on a wooden staircase. And at the time, they were coming closer to us. Like we could hear them coming up the stairs. It didn't sound like they were going down. It sounded like something was coming up. And again, our first thought was, hey, did the security guard come back? He didn't. So here's the first clip. Give it a listen. This is the full unedited clip, and then I'll be back to show you the next clip.
Not showing any respect.
Whippersnappers.
That's whole parts.
Are they being obnoxious?
You hear that?
Yeah.
That was footsteps.
Was that here?
Yeah.
Sounded like it.
Was that Anthony? I heard that.
Hello? What is that? Can you hear where that's coming from, Jim?
Sounds like it's coming from the stairwell.
Really?
That's stairs. That's up.
Like mice and stuff.
Back here. Okay, so that was the first clip. That's unedited. That's just how it happened. And again, we caught it. It's not as loud as I would have liked it to have been. I mean, the camera was far from the stairs. The stairs were kind of down at the end towards Laura, whereas I was at the other end of the hall filming. So then the second clip now is going to be me boosting as much as I possibly could the volume on the footsteps. I couldn't get it too loud without the sound sort of distorting, so I got it as loud as I possibly could. Again, listen with headphones just so you can kind of hear what we were hearing, and then I'll be back and kind of give my thoughts on this after this clip. So enjoy, listen with headphones.
Not showing any respect.
Whippersnappers.
That's whole parts.
Are they being obnoxious?
You hear that?
Yeah.
That was footsteps.
Was that here?
Yeah.
Sounded like it.
Was that Anthony? I heard that.
Hello? What is that? Can you hear where that's coming from, Jim?
Sounds like it's coming from the stairwell.
Really?
That's stairs. That's up.
Okay, so there was the edited clip. And again, I hope you can hear the footsteps. Again, it might depend on your headphones. It might depend on how loud you're listening to it. But they were there. We heard them. They're on the audio there. They're on the video. Now, I say on all of my podcasts, whether it's my show, whether I'm on another show, I never call anything paranormal. I never say this is evidence of the paranormal. But when people ask me what was the most convincing thing I've experienced as an investigator, this is the one that always comes back to me, because I was there and we recorded it. It's on video. It's on audio. We were alone in the house. There was nobody getting in that house. If anybody tried to get in, we would have heard them come in before we heard footsteps. The house was empty when we got there. The security guard, Anthony, left. There was nobody else in the house. All five of us were together, and we're all on video except for the person taking the video. And we did, we did jump up and investigate because, again, as skeptics, we're saying somebody must have come into the house. Maybe somebody came through the back door. Maybe somebody snuck in. Maybe somebody was in here prior. We don't know. And we just checked every nook and cranny that we could find, and we didn't hear anything else. We didn't see anything else. And interestingly, this happened at the stroke of midnight. We were kind of just getting ready to go, and we all had decided, like, if we're not getting any activity by midnight, we're going to go, because it's late and it's a long night, and Matt's time was precious to him. He was there just for a couple hours just to kind of see, hey, what could we catch, and to have that experience. And if by midnight nothing was going on, we were going to wrap up. But at the stroke of midnight, that's what happened. We hear these footsteps. Now, an interesting addendum to this: a few months later, we had gone back, and Matt and his assistant did not come back, but the security guard allowed us to go back, and he wanted to investigate with us. So we went back, and again, it was myself and Jimmy and Laura, Anthony, his wife, and I believe Colette was with us that time too. So back at the matron's house, and again, it was a fairly uneventful evening until about midnight. And at that point, Laura is on the first floor, and she's sitting kind of at the bottom of the stairs. And again, nothing was happening. It was a boring night, which most investigations are. It's sitting still and being quiet, and nothing happens. We love it. It's not for everybody. It's not what you see on TV, though. It really isn't. It's not, oh my God, what was that? What was that? Nothing really ever happens. So Laura's sitting there, and again, it's just about the stroke of midnight. We're thinking about wrapping it up, and we're all in different places. Laura was on the first floor. I think myself and Jimmy were on the second floor. I forget where everybody else was, but Laura was sitting in a chair. And again, this is not something we recorded, sadly, but she hears footsteps running towards her on the wood. And I guess there was like a little light paper bag, a plastic bag on the floor, like from Subway, like that, very thin. And it moved like as this thing ran past it. And she didn't see anything. It was just hearing footsteps kind of running towards her and the bag moving. And she kind of gasped and got our attention. And we all kind of ran down, and she explained what had happened. And she'd seen the bag move. She heard the footsteps coming towards her at the exact same time of day, midnight. And again, it was just one of those things that we thought was interesting. We're not saying it's paranormal. We're not saying it's evidence of the paranormal. We're still pretty skeptical, but it's one of those interesting things that happened to us twice. And a lot of skeptics out there will say, ghost hunting can't be replicated. People have an experience and then it never happens again. And, the scientific method is you have to replicate it. You have to say, if, you drop a ball and it falls, every time you drop the ball, it has to fall. That's gravity. That's science, to use a very simple example. So for us to have been able to replicate this, what happened exactly was footsteps, and they were running towards the stairs, and the same time of day. It was midnight. It was right at like the stroke of midnight that this happened both times. So is that replication? I don't know. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. It's an interesting story, and it's just one of those stories that when people ask me, what's my favorite story from my paranormal days investigating, that's the one that comes up as the one that I say, I have a story and I can kind of show you something where we recorded it. And again, I don't know exactly what we recorded. It could have been the house settling. It could have been someone who was hiding out in the house and trying to spook us. I don't think it was. We searched that house up and down. I'm not trying to proclaim this as any evidence. It's an interesting story, nothing more. And I always tell my son, don't believe what you see on the internet, because people can fake things. And I stand by that. I'm not expecting anyone to believe me. Believe my experience. Don't believe that it's paranormal necessarily, because I don't even. It's just something I can't explain. And I'm leaving it at that at this point, that it's unexplainable to me. It was unexplainable to my team. And again, we're all fairly skeptical. We believe there's something out there, but we know from years of investigating that it's not what you see on TV. This is not Ghost Hunters. This is not Ghost Adventures where something happens every week, where every little thing is a ghost and your meters are going off. It's 8 to 10 hours of sitting in a cold, dark, dank building or hot, dank building where nothing happens. You hear floors creak, you hear little noises, probably animals. For the most part, you're screaming into the void and getting no response. It's give us a sign, give us a sign. You're asking questions. You're listening to hours upon hours of audio, watching hours and hours of video to catch nothing. And not to say that people haven't caught interesting things, but just be wary when you see these TV shows or groups on YouTube showing you tons of evidence. It's probably not. And again, maybe there's one or two things out there that are interesting, but for the most part, nothing happens like what you see on TV or on internet. You know, this is for ratings, this is for clicks, this is for monetization. So full disclosure here, I'm not saying this is paranormal. I'm not saying it's evidence of any kind. I'm saying it's one more interesting anecdote that I have from my time in the field. And again, I would love to have Brian on the show. Brian, if you're listening, I got to reach out to you, brother. I would like to have you on the show. I know you're busy. My old teammates, if you guys want to come on, Jimmy, Laura, Colette, Stacy, Michelle, come on. Like, I'm willing to have you guys. I have to reach out to you. It's not your fault. It's totally my fault because I've just been super busy and don't manage my time very well. So that's the show for tonight. Hope you enjoy those videos. Hope you can hear what we heard. And leave me your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you guys think that might have been. I take no offense to debunking or skeptical opinions. So whatever you guys think it is, let me know. I'm very curious. And if you guys like these personal stories, let me know. I'm trying not to focus too much on myself. But I have certain weeks where lining up a guest can be tough. And mainly due to my schedule versus other people's schedules. I have a lot of people lined up that I want to have back on or on for the first time. And it's just between the holidays, between being sick, it's been very difficult for me. So, but I do enjoy doing these solo shows. So if you guys enjoy them as well, let me know. Some shout outs, Josh and Scott. Thank you guys again so much for last week. You guys are always lifesavers. Co-hosts, not guests. You know, you guys are co-hosts. You come on, guest co-hosts, I guess. You know, because you guys do come on, and you're definitely very much a part of the show, and you've helped make the show what it is. My buddy John, same thing. You have made the show what it is. You're a co-host. You're not a guest. We're going to do a show together soon where he's going to be the co-host. It's going to be mostly my stories that he was a part of or he knows of, and he's going to co-host with me. So that's a cool show that we have coming up. Want to give a shout out to my buddy Andy at Spooky Island Radio. Check him out. He does some great stuff. He's doing a lot of Missing 401 episodes lately, and he's just got a great podcast. So Andy, keep up the great work. And I'm going to put a link to his podcast below too. He does some good stuff. The lovely Rebecca, Christy, Lori, Stephanie, Jake, Gary, everybody who watches. Thank you guys. If I've forgotten anybody, I'm sorry. I will mention you next time. But for now, that's the show. Tune in next week and stay tuned for Riversend with Moonlight. Rock and roll.
Moonlight glowing, it fades on me and you, casting dancing shadows. The earth is draped in blue. Here in this moment, time is standing still. Won't you see she loves you? I don't think he will. Please take all this pain. Please take